You know, woven throughout the Old Testament, there's this incredible story, kind of like a golden thread, all about kingship. But what if the way we usually hear that story, that Israel sinned by asking for a king, is actually missing the bigger picture entirely?
So let's just get right to it. This is the big question. And if you've been around these stories, you probably think the answer is a simple yes. But what if the Bible's answer is way more interesting and actually reveals something amazing about God's plan from the very beginning? To really get to the bottom of this, we have to go way, way back. I'm talking past Samuel and Saul, past the total chaos of the book of Judges, all the way back to the foundational promises God made to Abraham. Now think about this for a second. Where does this promise show up? It's not a warning. It's not some kind of curse. It's tucked right in there with all the other incredible blessings for Abraham. So from the get-go, the idea of kings was part of God's good plan for his people.
And this wasn't just some throwaway line. Look at the pattern here. God deliberately repeats this promise. He says kings will come from Sarah, and then again to Jacob. And then it gets even more specific, like a camera lens focusing in, pinpointing the royal line right to the tribe of Judah. This makes it super clear this was never a backup plan. It was totally central to his design.
Okay, let's fast forward a few centuries. Long before anyone in Israel even dreams of asking for a king, God gets way ahead of them. Through Moses, he lays out this job description for a future leader that was honestly completely radical and countercultural for its time.
And get this, God doesn't forbid it. He sees it coming. He basically says, when that day comes, and I know it will, here's the blueprint. And this blueprint describes a king totally different from anything the surrounding nations had ever seen.
I mean, just look at the contrast here. It's night and day. The kings of the other nations were all about power. They built up huge armies, that's what multiplying horses means. They made all these strategic political marriages, and they just hoarded wealth for themselves. God's model? The exact opposite. A humble leader, one of their own people, who was completely dependent on him, not on worldly power.
So what does that tell us? It tells us the king's most important job wasn't to be a warrior, it was to be a model of faithfulness to God. His success wasn't going to be measured by how many battles he won, but by his commitment to God's word, literally reading it every single day. The role was spiritual above all else.
Okay, now let's jump over to the book of Judges and see what happens when a leader like that is missing. And trust me, this period of history really sets the stage for what's about to happen next. The author of Judges hammers this phrase home. It's like a drum beat in the background, getting louder and louder. He repeats it 4 times right at the end of the book, basically using it as the diagnosis for why everything was going so wrong.
Now that phrase, everyone did what was right.
It sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Kind of sounds like freedom, people just doing their thing. But in the context of Judges?
Oh no.
It's the signature catchphrase for a society in a complete and total moral nosedive.
In his own eyes. That's the devastating punchline. The lack of a godly king, a leader who could show them what it meant to do what was right in God's eyes, led straight to anarchy and turning away from God. The author is basically screaming, we need a king.
So all this chaos finally boils over and leads to this huge turning point in 1 Samuel chapter 8. This is when the people finally go to the prophet Samuel and make their big demand.
And right here, this is the heart of the problem. Remember, asking for a king? Not the issue. God had been planning for that all along. The issue was the kind of king they wanted. They didn't ask for the king God had designed. They asked for a king like all the nations, a warrior who would go out and fight their battles for them.
With that one request, they basically took God's perfect blueprint from Deuteronomy, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash. This was so much more than a change in government. It was a flat-out rejection of God himself as their true king, as their ultimate warrior.
But here is where the story gets so beautiful. Even this sinful, totally misguided request couldn't stop God's original, much bigger plan. That golden thread of kingship we've been following, it just kept right on going.
So you can see the thread so clearly now, right? The promise to Abraham, the blueprint from Moses, the eternal covenant with King David, every single step was pointing forward, building toward the arrival of someone much, much bigger than they could have imagined.
And that's how the New Testament kicks off. That is not an accident. Matthew, in the very first sentence, immediately ties Jesus to David and Abraham. He's showing us that Jesus is the true king, the ultimate fulfillment of this ancient royal promise that God had been weaving through history all along. So let's bring it all the way back home to our original question. Was it a sin for Israel to ask for a king?
The answer is a really nuanced yes. The request itself, that was fine. The sin was in their motive. They asked for a king to make them like the rest of the world, when God had always planned to give them a king who would save the world.
When you see this thread, it kind of reframes the whole narrative, doesn't it? It stops being a story about God reluctantly giving in to a bunch of stubborn people. Instead, it becomes this epic story of his patient, unstoppable plan, woven from the very beginning to bless the entire world through the one true king he always had in mind.